Human beings want to be thought well of, and they want to do it themselves. And there is a sense that the good life should follow doing right. And this sense is the sense of propriety. Now, propriety is not a normal everyday word. The guy who wrote this book, The Kingdom Among Us, says that propriety is a relation of fittingness. And with respect to the good life and doing right, there's this idea that they fit together. It's fitting that somebody who has done right should have a good life. But it isn't always so. And sometimes God is the reason why it isn't so. Hey everybody, welcome to the Sanctus Forum. I am Michael Stewart Robb, better known as Mike, and welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us once again. Today we will be talking about the divine conspiracy and Jesus's Beatitudes. This book has a lot to say about Jesus's Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, and so on. In fact, it has so much to say that it has generated a tiny bit of controversy around its interpretation of them, and the author, Dallas Willard, is in the chapter we're dealing with now, arguing for his interpretation as well as arguing against the one that has been more standard and traditional. And in last time's video, on the last section, I asked the question, how spiritually savvy do you have to be for God to be interested in you? And I feel like I didn't really stick the landing there at the end of the video. I tried to answer the question, but let me try to do that again. How spiritually savvy do you have to be in order for God to be interested in you? Not at all. God is interested in all who have faith in Jesus. And if you have faith in Jesus, it doesn't matter whether you are spiritually savvy or not. God is interested in you. He wants to bless you. He wants to welcome you into his kingdom, and he does. Faith in Jesus is what it's all about. Now, I have said before in other videos, this is how Dallas Willard is interpreting the Beatitudes. Faith in Jesus is a part of it. But he doesn't say that really at all. He kind of hints at it. And here in the section for today, which is called Staying in Charge, there is another hint at it. He says that the spiritually impoverished ones, poor in spirit, are blessed only because of the gracious touch of the heavens. Now, that gracious touch is touching them because Jesus is there with them and they are trusting him. That's the touch. They trust him and he is meeting them there. And it's really important that Jesus is there. And this is one of the things that frustrates Dallas Willard about the Beatitudes and how they have been interpreted, is that so many people read them as if Jesus isn't on the scene. And that's what he says here in this section here, that we read them as and totally bypass contact with Jesus in his own Beatitudes. This is in the second paragraph. And the reason for that is our sense of propriety, which we'll get to in a second. But what Dallas is saying there is that the Beatitudes are not generally true. These are not truisms. They're true because Jesus is there. And that's another way of hinting at the role of faith in the Beatitudes. Okay? Now, why is the other interpretation so appealing? And that is what Dallas is going to deal with for the most part in this section. Why is the other interpretation so appealing? And one of the appeals of it is that it allows us to embrace our spiritual incompetence. It sort of it takes the pressure off and sort of says, hey, God says we're blessed. Jesus says we're blessed, even though we are spiritually ignorant. And hurrah! I'll take that. I'll take that. Means I don't have to do anything spiritually. I don't have to be spiritually active. I don't have to spiritually inform myself or anything like that. Incompetence, that's me. And that's connected with this idea of being humble-minded. And so, hey, I'm spiritually incompetent. Isn't that great? I'm humble. So that's one of the appeals of the other interpretation, he thinks. Another of the appeals which he is getting into is this sense of propriety, that we think that goodness, moral goodness, is fitting with being blessed, and this other interpretation suits our sense of propriety. But the problem is that God sometimes just blesses people. He blesses people whose moral goodness or their position in life isn't exactly a good one. And he just comes in and he says, I want to give you something. I want to give you something through Jesus coming through your town, and you are just a Jewish peasant, and hey, here's my son. Why don't you meet him? And then we'll have a relationship together. Sometimes God does that. And you get into this sort of, we can get into this sort of elder brother syndrome, where we sort of look at this mercy that God has for people who are spiritually incompetent or who are messing up their lives in various ways, and he's meeting them, and we think, hey, weren't we like with you the whole time? Like, what's the deal? How come you're spending so much time with those folks? And this word propriety, I know I've mentioned it a number of times. It is a strange word, but it is an incredibly important word in this book. There's a whole section, proprieties aside, in the first chapter, and I did a whole video on that a few years ago. And also this guy who wrote this book has, I think it's in the 7th chapter, a long section on propriety and what that means for Dallas Willard. Now, the third reason why these the other interpretation is so appealing is that it leaves us in charge, Dallas thinks. It allows us to work God a bit like you would work a faucet. And so you have your action that you do, you turn it, and then voila, water comes out. And this idea of making God like some kind of machine, and this one side of the list being mournful, being meek, being persecuted, if we can just get those conditions, then God's going to be like, pow, blessing for you. And it happens like a faucet, like, we did our part, now God does his part. And Dallas is saying, Jesus is saying, hey, God doesn't work like that. The actual interpretation of the Beatitudes is different. It leaves God in charge, and God is going to come and he is going to bless people irrespective of their condition, irrespective of their moral goodness, irrespective of their place in life. The other interpretation, Dallas is just going to say, hey, look, can this really be what Jesus is saying? I mean, doesn't this look like salvation by works, or, as he calls it here at the end, salvation by attitude, or salvation by situation and chance? So, I mean, some of these conditions are things that it's hard to even make yourself like that. And so you have to be born that way, and that can't be the way that God is working. That can't be the understanding of the Beatitudes. That's what Dallas Willard is saying. So for all of these reasons, that's what makes this other interpretation so appealing, that it attaches to our sense of propriety, it allows us to remain spiritually incompetent, and it allows us to stay in charge. Now, I don't know if that convinces you to think about the Beatitudes differently, but at any rate, I hope that it helps you better understand what Dallas Willard is saying. And if you are still here at the end of this video, you probably should subscribe, because that means that you actually like hearing me talk about Dallas Willard, and this won't be the last video in which I do that. So go ahead and subscribe and stay with us and keep going, keep reading this book together. I look forward to the next video in which we are doing this kind of stuff, or anything in books and everyday spirituality. Bye.